Perhaps it is time to get our full-on propeller-head hats on and find out what cruise control and tyres have in common in the domain of beer garden engineering. Yes. Can anyone guess? It starts with an H. Anyone? Oh well. That's next. I'm John Cadogan from autoexpert.com.au, the place where new car buyers save thousands off their next new cars. Hit me up on the website for that. At the risk of sounding like friggin Morpheus, this thing is all around you, 24/7. It's there when you sleep, it's there when you pay your taxes, it's there when you help your landlady carry out her friggin garbage. And it literally saps the energy from you with every step you take. So there's that. And if you fell asleep during science classes at school, well, you'll just have to take the red pill with me now and catch up. This property aids and abets the second law of thermodynamics. Bastard. And if you ever wanted evidence that a god does not actually exist, then, Your Worship, I submit Exhibit A, the second law of thermodynamics. It is the harbinger of the heat death of the universe. If a god actually designed that in, like it was a carefully taken decision, then he is incompetent, a Muppet, or totally malicious, kind of like a Volkswagen powertrain engineer. If it's just all random chance, then okay, let us all just play the hand that the universe has dealt us here without making up some, crack-smoking Kim Jong-un in the sky. Okay, so if you grew up before the advent of the tablet and the smartphone, then you've probably done that or 10,000 variations of that endlessly after school, during recess and lunchtime, all of that stuff. Ball games were big. Of course, there's an app now. Get Ball Bounce Pro for iOS and Android, and kids never go out in reality again because, hey, that's what all parents want. Anywho, if you're an old fart like me, you've done lots of that, and then you start to notice things about the characteristics of balls bouncing because it becomes memory, and it's so important to winning all of those different games that you play with balls, right? And what you notice is, if you think about it hard enough, is that impact is always faster than rebound. And this is the case even if you take gravity out by punting the ball against a vertical wall. So gravity only acts like this. It doesn't really affect the horizontal flight dynamics of impact or rebound. So why is that so? And if you sit through science and you don't fall asleep and they start talking about the conservation of energy, which is essentially that law where you can't have anything for nothing, the first law of thermodynamics that says, you put a box around a system, if energy cannot escape through the box, then the sum of work and energy in the box is going to be constant in the time domain. It can't go anywhere. It can just kind of change form. So if you punt the ball really hard at a horizontal wall, it hits at 20 kilometres an hour. Let's say it bounces back at 15, all right? What's happened? Have we violated the first law by having less kinetic energy in the system on rebound than we did on impact, or is something else at play here? And obviously there's something else at play. The ball is not perfectly elastic, the wall is not perfectly rigid and massively immobile, so there's all of these imperfections in the system, and what happens is some of the energy is lost. It is actually dissipated in the ball as heat, and that happens all the time. In fact, your muscle memory is ingrained with those different dynamics of impact and rebound, and you actually get attuned to different balls because some balls are really pumped up and they're quite elastic, like those super balls that are almost solid rubber and they bounce alarmingly well. If you've only been bouncing a tennis ball and then someone bounces a super ball at you, it'll catch you off guard, right? Because there's different amounts of elasticity and different amounts of energy dissipation depending on the construction of the ball. So this is a long-winded way of saying that this property of dissipation happens in most physical interactions. Like if you're a long-distance runner, you buy expensive shoes to protect your skeleton, and basically they provide cushioning. And the problem with cushioning is that it also absorbs energy. So if you wanted to minimize the amount of energy that gets lost in processes like running, or processes like bouncing a ball, or processes like rolling a tire, wouldn't it be good to be able to do more than just say, oh yeah, we're losing a bit of energy, it's getting dissipated? Wouldn't it be good to understand the actual mechanism? Of all the risky things I have ever done on this channel, in a sense, I think this might be among the riskiest, because it is an attempt to do actual science, which is enough to get you thrown out as a journalist, as I understand it, to make you see what's actually going on down there. So let's have a crack at that. I need a couple of props. I need my ball because we're going to be chucking our ball at the wall and seeing what happens when it interacts with the wall. And I need to feel like an actual teacher. So let's think about the ball. It's sailing in as hard as against the wall, and we're going to shoot it with one of those ultra slow-mo phantom cameras. So just before it touches the wall, that one instant before contact, we'd be down here. No force and no extension of the ball. You can think about that like deflection or compression or whatever. It's just distance, amount of displacement of the surface of the ball, all right? When it touches the wall though, it starts to load up and load up and load up, and the pressure builds up inside the ball, and the rubber that forms the skin of the ball gets stretched and absorbs all of this energy, turns the kinetic energy into all of this kind of compression and strain energy in the ball. And then you get to this point of absolute maximum compression against the wall, and you can only get there by following this pink line to get to the maximum possible compression. And then when the ball is there, it's got the most compression and there's no more kinetic energy to absorb, it starts to rebound. So the deflection comes off and the wall pushes the ball away. So when it does that, it doesn't follow the pink line on the way back. It actually follows a line like this, like the green line. Now, you could shoot this with a phantom camera, you could put a scale behind the ball, you could measure the acceleration of the ball, you could weigh the ball and know its mass, and you'd know what was happening in the time domain, so you could measure extension and time. That would give you the load that's being applied to the ball during the collision. You could do all of those things and put actual numbers here and quantify the whole thing, and in fact that's how you do it in a lab at university. But let's just say it's going to look like that on the compression side, on the impact side, and then it's going to look like this on the rebound side. And that's kind of important because this area in the middle here is a real problem. If you sit down in a science class in high school, they're going to sort of tell you that energy equals force times distance. That's a common way to sort of ease you into this stuff, and you go, okay. And then later on, if you've demonstrated any interest at all and you're at university and they sit you through a Physics 101 for Dummies kind of course, someone who's much more highly qualified than me will sit you down and say, energy is the integral of load in the domain of extension. And you go, okay? What they mean is it's the area under these curves, right? So the energy that's being absorbed on the way in during the impact is the area under the pink line. So it's all of that. And the energy that gets returned to the ball is the area under the green line. So it's all of that. And the energy that is lost and dissipated as heat within the ball is this bit here in the middle. And that's kind of significant because if it was all just balls bouncing on the ground, I think we could live with that. But it's every sort of process that you need to put energy into to get a result. It's tyres, 50 million tyres in Australia rolling down the road, losing energy like that. What? It's even plush way back here, and I've spent some time locked in some fairly ordinary boots, let me tell you, and that is not one of them, I'll have you know. So let's talk about why the bouncy ball is exactly the same as that tyre there rolling on the road, and what rolling resistance is and what it all means, okay? Rolling resistance is generally thought of in the automotive industry as a 10% improvement in rolling resistance will deliver between a 2 and a 3% increase in fuel economy. And that tells me that 100% of rolling resistance out there right now, every car powering itself down the road, the rolling resistance there is worth about 25% of all of the fuel that is ever burned. So if you've ever wondered why it's worthwhile knowing about this stuff, rolling resistance, hysteresis, the bouncy ball, whatever, it's because 25% of all of the fuel that gets burned out there every day is just getting burned to overcome rolling resistance. And if we could save just 2% of that, that would be like 600 million litres of petrol and diesel combined every year just here in Shitsville. And there would be massive implications to that, national energy security implications and pollution implications, environmental implications, and it's all good if you save fuel for that because you would not compromise performance one bit. So let's go and look at why the bouncy ball is exactly the same as the rolling tyre. Okay, so to come to grips with the difference, or the similarity if you like, between the bouncy ball and the hardcore high performance tyre rolling down the road, you really do have to let it all go and take the red pill. And what we're going to have to do here, just to get past all of this, is we're going to have to do some beer garden engineering with the C word, that's right, calculus thrown in. What we need is a differential wafer of tyre. We need a cross section that's a hair width sort of thing, maybe 1/1000th of an inch across, and we'll just think about what happens to that cross section as the tyre rotates. And thankfully the answer is nothing much, between about here all the way around back down to about here. But this bit from here to here, when that little wafer is interacting with the road, that's really important. It's kind of like the ball hitting the wall, okay? So when I see the wafer come down here and start to interact with the road, and all of those forces, they can be sort of static forces thanks to gravity, and inertial forces thanks to things like cornering, then there are immense loads on the tyre. It's just like the ball in impact mode hitting the wall, isn't it? So the load is really ramping up and ramping up and ramping up. And then when you come back to here and the road starts to let go and it frees up our differential wafer for another revolution, that's like rebound mode for the ball. And exactly the same processes that underlie impact and rebound for the ball pertain to impact and rebound for the tyre, only I have to say, for the tyre, the loads are much higher and much more frequent, because you think about this tyre rolling down the road at 100 k's an hour. It's about 700 millimetres diameter for the tyre, so that's about 2 and a bit metres for the rolling circumference. 100 k's an hour is ballpark 30 metres a second, so we're talking 15 revolutions per second of the tyre at that speed. And that means each differential wafer is smashing into the wall and rebounding, dissipating energy in a little hysteresis loop, just like the ball, only 15 times a second. And P.S., the loads are just so much higher, aren't they? Because let's just ballpark the car. Maybe the car is 2 tons, maybe 60% of the weight is up the pointy end. So up here at the pointy end, that's going to be 1.2 tons shared equally between both front wheels if we're just driving down the road and nothing much is happening. So that's 600 kilograms of static load pressing down and releasing, smashing the ball into the wall 15 times a second. And of course, all of this is just costing you cash, times 4 tyres, times 15 de facto ATM withdrawals every second of turning and burning. Like that energy dissipation is all the system ever really gets paid to do. Hysteresis increases our dependency on foreign oil. It pumps up the cost of mobility in every context, not just monetary. It's a serious overall problem. And there's no escape even for electric vehicles. Hysteresis, rolling resistance, the same thing, slashes EV range by about 25%. Every vehicle on the road is affected. So, for astute viewers, you've probably figured out that it is tomorrow on my personal timeline, discontiguously, if the clothing and the subtly different location didn't already give that away. So, yesterday, the failing light kind of screwed me before the report was finished, had to wrap up early. This morning, full of car buying inquiry, and I'm off to lunch now with the boss of a top 10 car maker, and I'm kind of not supposed to talk about that, even though I think I probably just did. So with your permission, I'm going to make this the end of part 1 and bring you part 2 tomorrow, where I show you just how pervasive hysteresis really is in the automotive domain and how it prevents cruise control and even air conditioning from ever being dead accurate. So if, like me, you have absolutely no life whatsoever beyond these videos, then do join me for part 2 tomorrow. I mean, it's already mostly shot and mostly cut, so it'd be a shame to miss. Let me know what you think as well, and whether or not you like this kind of ultra-techie physics, engineering in the beer garden kind of content. And if you do, heaven knows I might inflict even more of it upon you in the future, if you're lucky.